The Glad Giver is an audio drama written and directed by Jill Korn. The play is inspired by the life of Julian of Norwich and forms part of the celebrations of Julian taking place in 2023. In the following behind-the-scenes interview, we hear Jill in discussion with Kate McAlpine, talking about how the play came to be written and produced. This podcast was recorded in Scotland and produced by Andrew Cheel.
I'm here talking to Jill Korn about her new radio play based on Julian of Norwich. I'm Kate McAlpine, and this is what we found out about. Jill, how did you first find out about Julian?
I think I've been aware of her without knowing the details for a number of years. And then on a visit to Norwich last year, to see relatives actually, I made a point of going to visit her cell, her anchorite cell, which is attached to the Church of St. Julian. It's actually a reproduction of what they think her cell may have been like. But that was what really got me interested and got me reading her book and reading about her life and the life of anchorites in general.
And what started you thinking about writing a radio play about her?
I had signed up for a newsletter for the Friends of Julian of Norwich, and on one of the newsletters that I received after the visit, I realised that we were coming up to the 650th anniversary of her revelations, or showings as she called them, and that there was going to be, amongst the other celebrations, there was going to be a visual art exhibition, which I thought was a wonderful idea. But at the same time, I'm very aware that not everybody can see. And so a visual art exhibition, it seemed to me, was perhaps missing out people who might be housebound or who might be visually impaired. And I thought that a radio play would be a great way of getting some of those messages across to people who perhaps, for various reasons, wouldn't be able to see the exhibition.
Is this a new medium for you?
No, this is my 9th play. I tend to focus on historic figures and sometimes folklore stories because I live in the west of Scotland and it's so rich in folklore. But because I've always had a real interest in history, and particularly in individuals in history that make a change happen or whose lives are significant in some way, but who, when it comes down to it, are ordinary people like us, like anybody. And it's that contrast between their greatness, if you like, in historic terms, and the reality of them. And that was what interested me about Julian.
Did writing the play give you more insight to her personally?
Very much so. I set out to think about what would a day in someone's life be like who had chosen literally to wall herself up in a cell. So in the Middle Ages, at the time when Julian lived, she lived between the 14th and 15th centuries. Her life overlapped those centuries. There were really quite a significant number of people, a lot of them women, who chose this life for various reasons. And in the most extreme cases, they would be literally walled up. They might even attend their own funeral rites and go into a cell and stay there. Now, Julian spent a lot of the time, as far as we know, examining and meditating on the revelations, the visions that she had had when she was 30 and before she became an anchoress. We think that she had 3 windows in her cell, one into the church, which is usually known as the squint, which allowed her to take part in the Mass, one into the street, which I'll come back to, and one which communicated with her servant. So for all practical purposes, she had a servant to bring her food, to take away waste, generally speaking, to help her to survive everyday life. But as far as we know, she lived until she was more than 70 years old. We don't know quite when she went into her cell, but we can assume probably that she lived maybe 40 years in there. Her window onto the world, however, is quite interesting because where the church is placed would be near the docks, the river docks in Norwich. And at that time, Norwich was the second city in England. And there would have been all sorts of comings and goings. It was also near the business quarter, where merchants came and went, where sailors came and went, where prostitutes came and went. And so life really passed by her window. So she was technically isolated. She probably wasn't as isolated from the world as we might think. And when I wrote the play, I wanted to bring in the different aspects of her life and show that it probably wasn't as narrow as we might imagine it to be.
Do you think she's still an enigma? Is there enough for you to work with, the factual information to go on?
That's a really interesting question. She is. There's so little that we know about her. We don't even know her name. If she's called Julian, it's probably because she was an anchoress attached to the Church of St. Julian. We don't know who she was. There are various theories as to who she might have been. Was she a nun? There are hints in her revelations of divine love that she may have had some kind of domestic life, because she uses domestic imagery of the kitchen, imagery of the household. So it may be that she was a householder. Perhaps she'd had her children and they'd grown up, and she'd chosen this life as a sort of adjunct to an adult life that was lived elsewhere. So we really don't know. She is an enigma. She's studied throughout the world, and she's revered in the church for her teachings. Her work was lost for quite a long time, or it was kind of put aside and not regarded for quite a long time. And her thinking was at odds with orthodox medieval thinking, if you like. She's deeply compassionate about the human race. She believes that everybody can be forgiven, which is not in line with medieval hellfire and brimstone thinking at all. So she sailed kind of close to the wind, and perhaps in those terms, and her teachings were lost. She's now very popular, if that's the right word. Her work is very much studied and read, and I think that's because she provides hope and compassion for the modern world. But you asked if she's an enigma. Yes, she is. And so what I had to do was take the very little that we know about her. We know more about her from her writings. We know how she thought and what she believed. But then I had to extrapolate what it would feel like to be an elderly woman who had lived in an isolated situation for all of those years. Now, I'm an elderly woman. Julian's probably about 70 at the time that I'm writing about her. And so I brought, I suppose, some of life as I know it to Julian, because you have to. Because in order to make somebody come to life, you have to ascribe human attributes and emotions and so on to them. And where else do you find those? You find them in yourself.
And what came first? Was it the words or the music, or did you hear it in your head at the same time?
I hear the words in my head, and they don't always come out the way that I hear them, but I do hear them in my head. So I proposed to the friends of Julian, who were organising this exhibition, that I might write a radio play, and I sent them a sample scene. And they wrote back and said, yeah, we like the idea, we'd like to see it completed, and we'd like you to make sure that there is religious content in the play.
Thank you, Jesus, because today you gave me the gift of sunlight and you took away the horrible darkness that clung to my soul this morning. Today you helped me feel useful and not just an old woman complaining about her aches and pains.
Now, I'm not a practising Christian, so this is quite a challenge for me, because then I have to think like a medieval Roman Catholic person, steeped in all of that imagery and thinking. So combining those things together and bringing out the words, if you like, from inside of me, but then also using Julian's words, because she's a fantastic writer. I mean, she really is a brilliant writer. So looking to combine everyday thinking with the words of someone who is deeply religious is really quite an interesting thing to do.
And when you presented it to them, was your play well received?
Yeah, they liked it. They let a local writer read it. He seemed happy with it. There were some quirky, unusual bits in it because, as far as I'm concerned, she's a human being. But there's some lovely things that you gain when you're writing and doing the research as you go along, perhaps. And I wanted Julian to be startled in one scene. I think it's the first scene, actually. I wanted her to be startled by an owl passing by the window. So I wrote that bit.
Lord, this has been a strange day. You saw it all, you must agree. And now the sun's setting and the city settling down for the night, and well, at least I hope so. I don't mind the inns turning out later and the sailors going back to their ships, but I do pray you will keep that noisy owl in his place. This is the time of day we remember your mother.
And then it occurred to me to have a look and see what did an owl mean in medieval terms? And found out that actually the owl can represent the devil in medieval terms. And that was perfect for me. But I'd hit upon it by accident. And that's the kind of gem that when you're writing, you think you've got it all planned out in your head. You think the voices are doing what you want them to do. And then suddenly you'll find a gem like that. And you think, yeah, that's it. That's what I wanted to do.
And then the music?
And then the music was really fortunate because I was speaking about it to a writer friend who also plays in a recorder group called This'll Do up here in the west of Scotland. And she said, we love playing early music. Would you like some early music recorded? I said, yeah, that'd be fantastic. So she got in touch with the leader of the group who came back and said, I would like to compose something specially for the play. And what can you say? But yes, please, thank you. And that's fantastic. So we went and recorded that beautiful recorder piece, which is based in thinking on the music of a woman called Hildegard of Bingen, who was a polymath who lived about 150 years before Julian, I think. So that's recorded and that's going to be incorporated. And then we were looking on the Zoom rehearsal with the actors, mentioned that we really could do with a choir. So that in the background of the church where Julian's cell is attached, we might hear the choir. And one of the actors said, I've got a friend who sings early music, sings plain song. Would you like me to speak to her? And so we had that music recorded. So instead of having to use a pre-recorded piece, we're using a piece that's been specially sung and specially recorded for the play. So I just feel really lucky. People have come forward and said, yes, please, we'd like to do this. And it's great. It's great.
That sounds really interesting that Julian has been taken up by so many different people and it's all come together as one project. What do you think was your greatest challenge in pulling it all together?
I think it was incorporating the religious thinking and the religious viewpoints of Julian into my version of her. As I said, that's that huge gap between the 21st century agnostic and the 15th century religious. And so I had to think quite hard about how I would do that. But that helped me in a way once I set about doing that, because that allowed me to find situations in which Julian's beliefs and compassion would be practically applied.
So tell us a bit more about the actual musicians and the actors. Who are they?
The actors have all been recruited through my contacting a company called Madder Market Theatre in Norwich, because bear in mind, I live in the west of Scotland. I know two people who live in Norwich, or I knew two people who live in Norwich, and so I didn't have any contacts. But someone put me in touch with Madder Market Theatre, and I wrote to them and asked them if they would help me to recruit actors, because I wanted people who had a local accent, and the Norwich accent is not one that would be easy to imitate for anybody, never mind a west of Scotland actor. So it was really important, I felt. And fortunately for me, found 6 amazing actors, 4 women and 2 men, who came forward with great enthusiasm. Again, the enthusiasm for this project. And I think because Julian of Norwich is so well known in Norwich and they're so proud of her, people were happy to be associated with this play. And when they'd read the script, they felt comfortable with it.
Honey from east, fresh off the boats. Get your good honey here from Eastern bees. Sweeter than anything you can get in England.
Here, it's a handful of sweet hazelnuts. That boy Thomas brought them just now, and he said to thank you. Heaven only knows where he got them.
So yes, I was able to recruit 6 actors from Norwich and thereabouts, find a recording studio and arrange to go into the studio. And it was pretty straightforward. Once you've got it set up and the actors are good, as these ones are excellent, then they seem to be able to put a lot of emotion and a lot of expression into a voice, which is essential for an actor, obviously, in radio play. They can't use their faces, they can't use gestures, all they have is their voice. So that went well. The musicians, apart from the choir, the recorder musicians are based in West Kilbride, and there are 5 of them. I'll put the names of everyone in the notes because I don't have them in my head just now. There are 5 of them, plus the composer of the music. And we brought equipment to the hall, and we decked the hall out with big blankets and soundproofing and all sorts. And we got them to play. I think probably took us maybe 6 takes for them to be happy with it. And the choir recorded it on their own in Norwich quite happily and just sent us the recording. So that's all been collected together now. We've got all the sounds that form the basis for that play. The producer, John Boyd, now has all of that, and he will design what we call the soundscape now. So he will, if I write an owl flitting past a window, John will make the sound of an owl flitting past the window. If I want a cat jumping on a bed, John will somehow contrive a cat jumping on a bed. He brings both technical skill and artistic skill to this, because I suggest sound effects, footsteps and, balls being passed backwards and forwards, but he's the one that actually imagines that and what would that really sound like, and puts that in such a way that you're painting a picture, you hope, for the audience, and so that you're drawing them into that scene and they're seeing it in their heads.
We're talking today mid-September. Where do you think the project has got to now? Are you completed? Are you finished? Or is there more work to do?
No, it's not completed. It's with John and it's over to him. So I kind of relax a bit until he starts to send me his takes, if you like. We are due to launch the exhibition in Norwich on the 17th of October. So we hoped we'd given ourselves enough time. I think it's going to be a little bit tight for different reasons, but we'll get there. We're launching on the 17th of October, and the exhibition will run for a month from the 18th of October. It's in a church. It's in St Stephen's Church in Norwich, which is a lovely big church. But this play, as far as I know, as far as we've got so far, will be in a quiet space where people can go and listen to it. It will be about 20 minutes long. But also we're hoping that we can play it from the front of the church so that as people go past, they'll hear extracts from it. And we're hoping that will bring them into the exhibition.
Well, that sounds really positive, that it's almost finished and you're going to be okay for your deadline. I think Julian would be smiling on you for all the work you've done and bringing her words to people who maybe haven't heard about her. Is there anything else you want to tell people?
I think just to say to people, it's been written for this exhibition. After that, though, we will be podcasting it as usual, so it will go out on my website, which is jillkorn.com. It will also go on to podcast platforms, and hopefully will go to fellow podcasters in the US and Canada and India for them to put out, to their audiences as well. So it'll be podcast in the usual way, and people will be able to hear it probably from round about mid-November, the end of November.
Oh, that's great. Well, thanks very much for telling us all about it.
Thank you.
This podcast was recorded in Scotland and produced by Andrew Cheel.